So Newgate Jail used to stand on the site of this park, and it was the scene of one of the biggest riots in 18th century Dublin, and it actually involved the city magistrate and the army rather than a gang of rioters. The jail that was here would have had absolutely horrendous conditions. It was the last place that you wanted to end up. It would have been dark, it would have been damp, and the inmates were not very well fed. One of the big disputes that used to break out all the time was between the army that was stationed in the city and the chief magistrates about who exactly is in control. Wouldn't really have been very pleasant to have a regiment stationed in the city. There was normally 2 or 3. They tended to create lots of problems, particularly when they went drinking. Not a good idea to have that many armed drunk men in your city. And we know that there was a lot of anti-military sentiment within Dublin, and people who just didn't want these men in the city. And I suppose the story from the 1760s illustrates exactly why. In 1768, there was a group of soldiers patrolling in the marketplace on a Sunday, and one in particular got into a fight with one of the city traders, who's a Mr. Durham. And the argument got very heated, and the soldier pulled his gun out, pointed it at the mouth of the trader, and let the gun go off. And this meant that the trader Durham lost most of his tongue, his teeth, his gums, and half of his jaw. And what's worse is that he actually survived this. Now, we don't know how long he survived, but I can't imagine it would have been very long. Doctors weren't very good at facial reconstruction in the 18th century, so really it would have been an awful way to survive, no matter how long you did manage to survive from something like that. So anyway, the army heads back to the barracks. The Lord Mayor, who's supposed to be looking over the marketplace, finds out about this, and the next day, which was a Monday morning, he went down to the barracks, spoke to the regiment, imprisoned the soldier that was responsible for this in Newgate Jail, which would have been here. And this is when the big dispute erupts. Does the Lord Mayor actually have the right to imprison a soldier who would have been under the control really of national authorities rather than city authorities? And the 38th Regiment, who were involved in this, are really disgusted that one of their soldiers has been taken away by a chief magistrate. They say it's absolutely nothing to do with the city. And so later on, they gather in the marketplace, all of the 38th Regiment. They have bayonets, they have swords, and they have giant sledgehammers, and they make their way to the jail and they begin to bash down the door. Now, apparently the main door of the jail would have been a big, huge wooden door, very difficult to get into because, of course, you don't want your prisoners to escape. It takes them quite a while to actually bash in the door, but they manage to do it. And at this point, you're thinking, well, where exactly is the Lord Mayor? Apparently news had gotten to the Lord Mayor, and a couple of newspaper reports say that the Lord Mayor was actually hiding from this. Eventually, they managed to dispense a high sheriff. In the meantime, the army is after releasing their friend, but they also release 78 prisoners from the jail. Now, Newgate Jail is notorious. It's where the worst criminal offenders are going to be sent. It's where your thieves are, where your murderers are. This is really bad news for the city. So 78 prisoners are released onto the streets. In the meantime, the poor High Sheriff has shown up with 12 city guards. The city guards get trampled on by the soldiers, and they imprison the High Sheriff in one of the prison cells. Now, the High Sheriff is actually the person who rounds up people who are about to be arrested and put on trial, and they're the ones who also manage to look over executions in the 18th century and make sure peace is maintained. So there's a certain sense of irony that all of a sudden this High Sheriff, who normally imprisons people, is now the one who's being imprisoned. And of course, very quickly after they've released them, the regiment dispense and they head back to the army barracks. And of course, the releasing of 78 prisoners creates absolute chaos. And a report in the Freeman's Journal a month later says that only 19 prisoners at that point had managed to be returned to the prison. So there's still like loads of prisoners on the loose. For weeks afterwards, crime has gone through the roof in this city. One of the things I'm always amazed at is that all these prisoners are released and they don't actually flee the city. They stay in the city, which will tell you something about identity in the 18th century. But eventually things come to a head, and it's decided that the Lord Mayor cannot really arrest any of the soldiers. They allow him to arrest one person who had bashed in the door, and the rest of them seem to get away scot-free. But it's one of the biggest riots of this period.